All right, hi again, everyone. So we're going to get started. So here is Stuart McGrath to talk about how website speed impacts conversions.
Thanks very much, Roxy, and welcome everyone. Really thrilled to have the opportunity to talk about one of my favourite subjects, which is the impact of website performance on sales, particularly for e-commerce organisations. And just by way of introduction to Section.io, we've been in the business of helping enterprise customers improve their website speed and hence their revenue and conversion rates for about 5 years now. We've got offices here in Colorado, USA, and Sydney, Australia. So let's jump into what we're going to walk through today. Firstly, I'm going to have a walk through what website performance is in the context of today's discussion. Then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about how website performance can impact revenue for websites. We'll talk about how to measure website performance so that you can understand the tools and tricks and tips for understanding how your website is performing. And then we'll dive into a few actionable items which you might be able to work through in order to improve your website performance. We'll talk through a few little wins and then jump into some what we call the big wins for website performance. And one of those, just to be a bit of a spoiler, is going to be talking about caching and CDNs. And finally, we'll wrap that up with a real-life example from an e-commerce company called Adore Beauty. So first of all, what is website performance? And what do we mean by website performance in the context of today's discussion? When we talk about website performance, sometimes we hear people talk about the bounce rate of their website, perhaps the conversion rate of their website, perhaps the net promoter score of their website, or indeed the overall revenue which may be driven from their website. But what we're going to talk about today with respect to website performance specifically is website speed. And when we talk about website speed, we don't just talk about website speed on your ordinary everyday traffic period. We want to understand what your website speed is, website performance is, at any scale of traffic. And this is important because website performance, when you have large volumes of people on your website, is so important. At those times you've got critical volumes of traffic and numbers of people hitting your website, so you want to make sure they have the best possible experience. But also understanding what your website performance might be at lower traffic periods. One of the often forgotten elements of website performance is that it can change when you've got very few people on your website, if that may happen overnight or in the wee hours of a particular time zone morning. So just for the purposes of today, we're going to focus on website performance as being the speed of your website at any scale of traffic. So what does website performance mean for the conversion rate or revenue in effect for your business? There have been lots of studies done of website performance for the impact it has on the conversion rate in businesses. Some of the most well-known ones are those done by the likes of Amazon and Walmart. And you can see here these metrics with respect to Amazon saying that just for an additional 100 milliseconds, that's 1/10 of a second in page load time, Amazon would lose 1% in sales. Walmart also discovered that speed has a massive impact on the conversion rate of their website. And there have been other studies done by large players which are analogous to these e-commerce examples. So Google and Bing have done some quite extensive studies on the impact of their page load speed versus the number of searches that might be done on their platform. In fact, which is the engagement and therefore the conversion rate on their platforms. And you'll notice that each of those examples I've raised are from some of the larger players. Those sorts of studies can be quite difficult to pull off, but we've done a number of studies with some of our customers and found exactly the same results that Amazon, Walmart, Bing, and Google have seen. Without fail, every single one of the customers that we worked with that have improved their website performance have also shown a commensurate improvement in their conversion rate on their e-commerce websites. So, next question then is, if we understand that website performance is going to improve our conversion rate, we would want to understand how we should measure website performance. How do you know if your website is too slow, or how do you know how fast your website is, full stop? One of the interesting examples I've had from customers is when we walk into businesses, they say, look, I think my website's okay, it feels fast enough, or I think my website's too slow, it feels slow. And I don't think that's a good enough measure of whether your website is slow or fast. You know, if you think back to that Amazon example of 100 milliseconds, it's actually very, very difficult to feel whether a web page is 100 milliseconds slower or faster. But what we do know is that 1/10 of a second on a page load will impact your conversion rate over time. So it feels slow is not good enough. These examples of someone running down the hall in your offices and saying our website's slow is also not good enough. Or the boss coming in from home over the weekend and saying our website was really slow over the weekend, we need to do something about it, is also not good enough, because there are so many other factors on that single example that may have impacted that user's experience. You know, was the boss's kids in the next room downloading large game files at the time that he was browsing the website? So it feels slow is not a good enough measure. I've also been in businesses that have had small teams of people sitting around their website with a stopwatch, timing the speeds of their pages. And I don't think that's good enough either, because again, when we're talking about 100 milliseconds, and I'm not sure what you're like with a stopwatch, but I'm pretty sure my reaction speeds are not good enough to give a concrete example of how fast the website is for all of my users, given that I'd be sitting in front of one computer with one stopwatch measuring the performance of the website. Fortunately, there are some more scientific measures for measuring website performance. One of those we call synthetic measures, and this consists of servers hopefully located around the globe, which will run a browser, a browser like Chrome, or hopefully a real browser like Chrome or IE, Microsoft's Edge, we should call it now. And those browsers would fire tests at your website and measure the results of the website. So there are some really well-known examples of these, things like Pingdom and Gomez. Section.io has some synthetic measurement tools. And one of my favorites in the market is the open source web page test. And you can see on the right-hand side of this slide the results of a synthetic test from web page tests, showing what's called the waterfall view of a website. If you haven't seen one of these before, they are fantastic for understanding what might be slow within a particular page. So it is a useful diagnostic tool. And you can see here, for example, the top request, which is actually the HTML document for those of you in the technical space, is taking a long time to come in, which would severely impact the user's experience of that first page load. So synthetic measures are great for things like diagnosing problems within particular web pages on your website. I wouldn't say synthetic measures are wonderful for understanding the real performance of your website. To understand the real performance of your website, you should understand how your users are experiencing the website. And to do that, real user monitoring is the go. Real user monitoring consists of a JavaScript tag which will fire in your users' browsers and send back information about how they experienced your web pages. Again, there are some great examples of real user monitoring which you may have seen. Things like New Relic has got a browser, a really good browser, real user monitoring offering. Section.io has some real user monitoring. And one that you may be familiar with is Google Analytics also has some real user monitoring available. And real user monitoring is great in that you get an understanding of how your real users are experiencing your website. it includes an analysis based on all of your users' locations, what browsers they're using, whether they're using mobile or desktop, whether they're on Chrome or Edge or Firefox, so that you get the real data on how your users are experiencing your website. I would say a word of caution around Google Analytics. Google Analytics page speed metrics are usually a very small sample of your pages loaded. I think it's around 2 to 5% usually is the number that Google sample. And the other danger with Google Analytics numbers is that they take a mean or an average over time, which can be a difficult measure if you have difficult measure to rely on if you have, for example, slower periods through the night or one very fast period. An average over time is going to be misleading in terms of your page view performance. So it's important when we're thinking about real user monitoring to understand the metrics we're looking at from perhaps a median page view perspective and to see all of your users' page views. So if that's how we measure, what measurements would we be looking at when we're thinking about real user monitoring and or synthetic measures? And unfortunately, there are a number of measures to think about when we're thinking about website performance. When you can imagine downloading a web page, there are a few things that you're going to experience as that page comes into your browser. One is how quickly does it start? How quickly do you see the first thing on the screen? Then how quickly does the rest of the page build above the fold? And finally, how quickly is all of the items in the page available for you? So there are some metrics that are available around that. Things like start render time is available out of synthetics and real user monitoring. We can see visually complete metrics, which is telling me that the page visually is complete, even though there may be other things like JavaScript loading in the background. Or I can get DOM complete, which is when that spinning wheel stops for page load time. And finally, fully loaded when all of the elements are loaded in the page. So each of these metrics are interesting to us to understand how the user is experiencing the page. There are also metrics available in which we can refer to like a speed index in the market. And this is an attempt to crunch all of these metrics together in one measure so we can compare speed index for one website versus another website, or perhaps your website today versus yesterday. But frankly, I think the best thing to do is to understand which of these measures are important to the thing that you're trying to adjust in your page performance. So for example, in that web page test waterfall we saw just a moment ago, the start render time on that page would have been terrible because it took a long time for the HTML document to come in. So we would have been looking at a terrible start render time, and that would have been something that we'd want to tackle immediately to improve the page performance and conversion for that website. So these are the measures we want to look at. What would represent a good measure for web page performance? Start render time, really your user should be seeing something pop up in the page well less than 1 second. I think saying less than a second is probably generous. It should be much faster than that. Theoretically, if we conserve a good HTML document, instead of the 2.5 seconds you saw a few moments ago, we should be seeing those HTML documents appear in milliseconds, like 100 milliseconds, perhaps 60 to 100 milliseconds, maybe 150 if they're far away, but well less than a second should be the start render time. And that's super important for your users, as you can imagine, because if they're sitting there with a blank screen for even a second, it feels like a long time waiting for something to come in. And if they're waiting a second for the first interaction with your website on the 10 pages that they need to browse in order to get through selecting a product and checking out, that's going to feel like an awful lot of wait time for that user. 2 to 3 seconds visually complete. The magic number in web performance is less than 2 seconds page load time. We've said 2 to 3 seconds is a good target because that's when your user feels like they can interact effectively with the page when things have stopped sort of moving around in the screen for them. And with that 2 to 3 seconds complete, usually the user will feel like they can not only interact with the page, but start using, browsing, understanding what's on the page, and you should see a significant improvement on conversion when you can move down to that 2 to 3 seconds to complete. I say 2 to 3 because there are going to be users in your world that you can't significantly improve their performance. There may be some people who are on very poor devices, and there may be some users on devices, for example, when their son's downloading large game files in the room next door. So we need to be understanding of targeting these metrics, but also understanding of the impact that your users and their devices and their locations and the way in which they're interacting with the site may play out against your target performance metrics. Now, I have mentioned it a couple of times, but we shouldn't also forget about mobile with respect to performance. Mobile is, we all know it's an increasing part of website user device. There are a few little tricks and tips with respect to mobile in terms of performance and understanding the performance engagement of users with mobile. Generally, historically, the users of mobile and browsers and websites have been from the younger demographic and who are significantly more demanding with respect to website performance. Conversely, or challengingly, there are also difficulties with getting web pages into mobile, because we have to think about not just the potentially lower power device that the user may be handling in comparison to a desktop or a laptop, but we also need to think about the network that's servicing that device. If that device is not on a Wi-Fi connection and is running in 4G, then it's on a much chattier network. So we need to think about performance angles as to how we can improve the performance for mobile devices, given there's such a larger proportion of our customer base that we see for our customers these days. So let's jump into some things that we can do in order to provide you with some takeaways to think about for improvement of a website performance. I've highlighted just a few little wins here for website performance improvement, and by no means is this an exhaustive list, just a couple of examples for you to think about in terms of what you're doing on your website. There's probably hundreds of different things that you could do for the performance improvement of your website, depending on your user base, the nature of your application, etc. But generally, we find these are a few little things which come up most often. And the first of those, of course, is image optimization. We can talk about image optimization not just in terms of the size of the images, given that for most websites, images will be the largest files, largest component from a data perspective that you'll send down to your users' devices. It's important that we can minimize the size of those files as much as possible. And that's just step one. We can also think about then, if we can optimize the images for size, we should also think about optimizing the images for the dimensions of the image as it appears in the browser. Different browsers, based on different parameters, will accept the images in different sizes. So if we can send the image in the right size for that particular page, for that particular browser, then the browser at your user's hands will be doing less and the image will appear faster for that user. There are also things we can think about for images around writing the images as the right file type for your browsers. Some browser types prefer different image types as compared with other browser types. So if we can send the image type, PNG, JPG, or WebP, that the browser prefers, then the browser will also be able to render those images faster. And finally, we can even do things like, in terms of improving the weight of the images, do things like strip pixels out of images for smaller screen devices where the users may have a lower fidelity device in their hands. So there are lots of other things we can do with images, but image optimization is super important for your user's experience. The second area which we come across quite often is third-party JavaScripts. So third-party JavaScripts are those JavaScript elements which you insert in your page in order to pull in content from some other provider or activate something from some other provider. A great example here is if we don't, a great example would probably be something like Optimizely. Optimizely in itself is a wonderful tool for A/B testing elements on your website, but it's activated with a piece of JavaScript. And if we put that JavaScript, or you guys put that JavaScript in your page in a suboptimal way, it can severely impact the performance of your web pages in the hands of your users. In fact, blocks the rendering of your pages while it executes the JavaScript in the browser. Now, we definitely want to understand, measure all the things. So we definitely want to understand A/B testing and the benefits that it can bring, but not to the detriment of your users' experience in terms of performance. And there are lots of other examples of JavaScript. We see many websites where perhaps through Google Tag Manager, departments have inserted JavaScript tools on their website and are no longer even using the tools, but the JavaScript is still executing in the customers' browsers and affecting page load speed. So definitely think about the third-party JavaScripts that are on your website. And finally, and in a fairly similar vein, CSS code, minification of the CSS code is important. I would also say remove things like CSS bloat from websites. We often see CSS that's being the cascading style elements that are being dropped into users' browsers, even though they're used. So for example, someone 5 years ago might have decided that all the buttons on the website should be green and dropped in a piece of CSS for that. And then 2 years later decided all the buttons should be orange and moved in a new piece of CSS code for orange buttons. But leaving in the old CSS. And that CSS bloat is something definitely to work with the development team on to remove additional CSS, or if we can't remove it, then certainly minify CSS. So there are a few little wins to think about. On the big wins side, I've got a few big wins here for you, which we can talk through around, and I call them big wins because they're generally the things that deliver the biggest bang for your buck in terms of website performance. The first of those is caching, and as I said at the outset, there's a bit of a spoiler alert on that one. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about the use of content delivery networks, content delivery solutions, and Varnish Cache in particular. But two that I'll talk briefly about here is upgrading to HTTP2, and secondly, choosing a good hosting provider. So as you may be aware, last year in 2016, early 2016, HTTP2 was released as the new HTTP standard, replacing HTTP 1.1. And the benefits of HTTP2 is that by moving a website to full SSL, serving your entire website over SSL, and therefore taking advantage of, or enabling yourself to take advantage of delivering your website over HTTP2, you can actually serve more content in the browser. Your users' browsers can consume more content faster than over HTTP 1.1. So it's a fairly simple big win that you can grab, provided that you're serving over infrastructure that supports HTTP2 and you've moved your site to full SSL. Full SSL, of course, has also the benefits of full HTTPS, also has the benefits of improving the security of your website because everything's served encrypted, but also has the benefits of improving the SEO for your website, because Google ranks more highly those sites that are serving over HTTPS, given that Google is also chasing a more secure web. So upgrading to HTTP2 requires moving to HTTPS and has the ancillary benefits of improved security in addition to the improved performance. Generally, we see, just to kind of ballpark that type of benefit, generally we see in the order of 10 to up to 20% performance improvement from moving from HTTP 1.1 to HTTP 2 protocol. And the second point there probably is a bit of a motherhood statement, but choosing a good hosting provider is super important. One that supports your application and can understand what's happening on your application. One that supports HTTP2 capabilities would also be important, where you don't have a layer like a content delivery solution such as Section.io that supports HTTP2. So I know that many people talk about the hosting provider as something that's important in their world, but probably don't pay enough mind to the performance attributes of the hosting provider for your particular web application. So there's a couple of wins we can talk about. I'll dive into caching and use of content delivery solutions a bit more so you can understand what we're talking about there when we're thinking about website performance. Caching. Caching means storing parts of your website on some other component that sits in front of your web servers, so that when your users are browsing your web application, they don't fetch from your web servers every time. And I'll walk you through a little example here so I can understand it. So let's assume that visitor number one comes to visit your website. If you have a caching layer, that big dot in the middle in front of your website, when the very first visitor visits your website, that cache is going to be empty. There'll be nothing in there for that visitor to fetch, so the request will go all the way back to your web servers to fetch the web page and all the images and CSS files and JavaScript files that make up that page to send back to the visitor's browser. At that time, when the visitor's browser is being served all those assets and elements, the cache can also keep a copy of those assets or elements in its servers. And this is wonderful, because what happens when visitor 2 comes in is that the second visitor to your website, and the thousands of visitors that may ensue after that in the next minute or 10 minutes, can fetch, when they're requesting the web page, can fetch that web page and the images and the CSS files from the cache directly. They don't need to go back to the website server for all the content for every web page on your website. And that's super important, because when we're thinking about web performance, what that means is the user has, or visitor 2 and maybe the next 1,000 visitors in that minute, have been able to fetch information directly from cache, and it's faster. And that's, I'm thinking about faster, it's in the order of 60 to 100 milliseconds to fetch from a cache versus going back to your web server, which may take 1 second, or again, as we saw earlier, 2.5 seconds to fetch that HTML document. So significantly faster, but also allows for a lot higher scale of your web application, because all of a sudden your web servers are doing a whole lot less. To service customer 1, they need to service to serve out the web page and the assets. Service customers 2 to 10,000, your web servers are doing nothing in terms of the web page and or assets. What do we recommend for using as a caching tool? As you can see here, we recommend Varnish Cache. And Varnish Cache is an open source HTTP accelerator or caching piece of software, which you can install yourself and run on a server in front of your web application, or you can connect to a content delivery solution like Section.io, where we run Varnish Cache for all our customers on a distributed network. What do I mean by distributed network? When I'm talking about distributed network, I'm talking about a content delivery solution. And by placing Varnish Cache on servers, not just in one server in front of your application, but in servers globally located, those cached images or the cached HTML, cached web page can be fetched for users from a server which is closer to them. So in this example, let's assume that your web servers are located in, say, New York, where a visitor browses your web page from Los Angeles. That visitor can fetch images, content, CSS, JavaScript files from the local location, which saves the trip back to your web servers or back to a location on the East Coast. And that can be very, very useful from a performance perspective when we're talking about hundreds of requests per page and maybe 10 to 20 pages per session for your customers. So then let's have a look at a case study to see what this looks like in action. One of our customers, Adore Beauty, is an online beauty store, a pure play e-commerce shop that came to us to understand how they could improve the performance of their website. We spent a bit of time working with them, looking at things like what are there in the quick wins, what are there in the big wins, how can we work on caching the pages and the images, etc., so that users have a faster experience or can fetch from the edge nodes. And in fact, when users are browsing things like login, checkout, etc., that those users can fetch from the origin servers where they have to, and the origin service can work in a much faster way. The results we achieved with Adore Beauty from a performance perspective, looking at a few different page types here, is for users browsing the first page in any session, we improved their page speed by about 2.5 seconds, and that was for Adore Beauty, represented about a 30 to 35% improvement in performance. And then similarly for the home page and product page, just taking a couple of examples, we were able to reduce the page speed by about 2 seconds for each of those page types. Now, what did that mean for Adore Beauty in terms of revenue and conversion? From a customer experience perspective, it meant that customers were viewing about 9.4% more product pages. They were spending more time on the website, browsing more pages. They were more engaged with the website. It meant that they got to the checkout page 15.5% more often. And most importantly, they reached the checkout success page or effectively converted 16.5% more often. So that's a 16.5% improvement in conversion for Adore Beauty. And the Adore Beauty team are a team that are fanatical about measuring results. And in fact, when Kate, the CEO of Adore Beauty, saw these results, she didn't believe them because they had measured so many other different conversion optimization elements for their website that came in at sort of 2% to 5%. So when they saw a 2% to 5% improvement or even a 1% improvement in conversion, they were pretty rapt. When they saw 16.5%, they actually didn't believe the results. And what Kate said to me was, we don't believe it. We want you to leave this testing on for another few weeks. And every time I came back the same, Kate said, okay, it's coming back the same, and now I can actually see not just the performance improvement, not just these conversion numbers you're showing me, but also we're seeing the dollars in the bank. There was a noticeable improvement to the revenue that they were generating from their website. So in summary, for website performance, we've talked about what website performance means insofar as thinking about the performance of a website at any scale. It needs to be fast, not just during your ordinary periods, but also when you're in your peak traffic periods. That's so important as we hit Black Friday and Cyber Monday type periods to make sure that your website is performing for all of your customers when they're there and ready to buy. We have had a look at some industry examples and in fact a specific example from Adore Beauty as to how performance impacts revenue for websites. We've had a look at metrics you should use to monitor your website. Let's move to scientific ways of measuring performance on your website. Specifically, always think about the real user experience of your website. Real user monitoring is fantastic, as I mentioned, and synthetic tools are great for diagnostics. So a combination of both those tools is the right set in order for you to understand, monitor, measure, and improve your website performance. And then we've had a look at some specific little steps that you can take to improve performance. As I mentioned, there's a small set there of many which we can work with, but there's some that we come across quite often, which was image optimization, third-party JavaScripts, and managing CSS on your website. And then finally, on the big wins, aside from HTTP2 upgrade and making sure that you have the right hosting partner, we also recommend working out a caching strategy for your web application so that your web application can perform at its peak at all times for those transactions which are so important, the checkouts, the cart conversion, the logins, the My Account views your customers want, at the same time as serving out super fast content, and preferably from some location that is close to your end users. So that's what we've learned today. If you would like some more information, we've got a bunch of information at our Improving Performance and Scalability guide. You can see it download there, and I think this webinar has been recorded also, so I'm sure we'll make that available in due course. With that, I'll hand over to Roxana to see if there's any questions that you may have.
Yeah, thank you. So we have a couple questions we'll start with, and if you have any, you can just type them into the chat portion of your webinar or the Q&A portion, and you can always email us later or tweet at us, and we'll answer them there too. So, okay, the first question is, if I install a caching solution like Varnish Cache, how do we know that it's working properly, that it's actually speeding up our website, and that it's caching everything it's meant to be caching?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thanks for that. I guess the response to that is, again, measure all the things. So Varnish Cache, as I mentioned, is a wonderful tool, a wonderful piece of software that needs to be installed on a server and run in front of your web application. In order to understand how it's performing, we need to extract the logs from Varnish Cache and the traces to see what it is and isn't caching. There is some great tools that we can run to configure Varnish Cache. It's very flexible to configure, but of course, if we configure it and we're running it in front of our website, we definitely want to measure what it's caching, i.e., is it caching images? Is it caching CSS files? Is it caching the JavaScript files? And most importantly, is it, and how much is it caching the HTML documents for your website? Because they're the biggest win for caching for your website in terms of both performance and scalability of your website. So if you're installing Varnish Cache by yourself, you'll definitely want to set up an environment that allows you to extract the logs and crunch them into metrics for your Varnish Cache instance. And I would suggest that you would probably want them in near real time, so you can understand what's happening on your website at any particular instance from a caching perspective.
Great, and the second one is sort of related to that. So I think you mentioned briefly caching the HTML document, which Varnish Cache allows you to do. So is it risky to cache all of the content, including the HTML document and all of the static images and CSS files? What are the risks to that, or how can I deploy that without breaking my website?
Is it risky? Yes and no. Nothing's risky if we do it in the right way. But we do want to be careful and considerate with what we cache, as well as understanding that we've got the tools in place to clear the cache instantly when we need to. So we definitely, for a normal e-commerce style website, we do not want to cache all of the content. There will definitely be content that you want to serve to your users, which is personalized or is user account details or their cart experience. Those are elements of your website which we definitely do not want to cache. So we need to be able to drive your caching solution to avoid caching the wrong things. But you should also be able to drive your caching solution to cache as much as possible of the right things. One of the problems we see in this space is people are worried about caching the wrong things, so therefore they cache nothing. And you're missing out on such a valuable opportunity to improve the performance and scalability of your website by caching nothing. So having the right monitoring tools in place and the configuration tools in place to allow you to drive the caching solution to cache as much as possible of the right things but avoid the wrong things is super important. And the other thing I would say is that having tools available for you to be able to purge the cache or clear the cache when you need to instantly is also very, very important. So we've seen customers have experiences with solutions where it took maybe 30 minutes on some of the content delivery networks to clear a cache or purge a cache. And in that 30 minutes, you can be in mixed states of application during a deployment and cause all sorts of problems. So it's very important to be able to have the safety of being able to purge the cache instantly. And when I'm talking about instantly, I'm talking about sub 200 milliseconds in cache purge.
Great, okay. And then the last question is on monitoring. So what is a good free tool out there that can get me started with monitoring my website performance?
Yeah, I mentioned a few of those already, I think. And aside from Section.io's real user monitoring and synthetic monitoring, you could have a look at things like Web Page Test, which is a great synthetics tool. And I would also recommend, if you're not using it already, to think about things like application performance monitoring and something like New Relic, which you can run for free, albeit with a reduced feature set and reduced period of data retention, is also a great tool to think about from not just the real user monitoring, but also the application performance monitoring.
Great. Okay, with that, I think we will wrap up. We will be sending a recording of this around if you didn't catch the whole thing, and feel free to get in touch with us if you have any other questions that come up. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.